So imagine if everything you've ever known, every institution you've ever trusted, every person you've ever loved, not only turned their back on you, but actively hunted you because of your faith. Would you still believe? Hey everybody, my name is Eric and this is Blessed and Bookmarked. First of all, I want to start off saying thank you so much to everybody who went and liked and commented and subscribed to my first video and to my YouTube channel. It means the world to me. Everybody who sent me a message, who showed me encouragement, thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it. If you haven't already done so, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to my channel and turn on that notification bell so that every time I put a new video up, you'll be aware of it. So the book I'm going to talk about today, Hearts of Fire, is a collection of heartbreaking stories that demonstrate how faith in God can carry somebody to the place where they'll see God's will fulfilled in their lives. It is the story of 8 heroic women who demonstrated their faith in the midst of persecution. All these women come from different countries around the world, all of which are classified as either hostile or restrictive against Christianity. If it's hostile against Christianity, that means that there are laws that actively deny people the right to practice their Christian faith. If it's restrictive, it means that there are de facto laws. In other words, people themselves, without really government sanction, persecute people who practice the Christian faith. You know, I feel very blessed to live in a country that I do because I'm allowed to have the privilege and the freedom to practice whatever religion I want. I can speak about my religion. I can gather with like-minded people. I can practice and worship openly and not have to worry about hiding. And I feel like more often than not, we take that privilege for granted and we don't do those things. We don't gather when we should. We don't speak about our faith and we don't worship openly, letting the world know that this is the faith that we have. Oftentimes we want to keep our faith private and to ourselves and not share it with other people. Meanwhile, there are people in different parts of the world that are dying to do so, but are restricted, even to the point of being persecuted. But it's books like these that can hopefully serve as a cold bucket of water being thrown on our heads that after reading them would ignite our passion for spreading the gospel. It's stories like the ones in a book like this that encourage us to stand for and stand with and maybe even join our brothers in this cause to spread the gospel around the world. So you can actually get this book for free. I just signed up on the website and they send it to me absolutely free. So I'll put a link to that in the description below. But if for whatever reason you don't want to sign up and you actually want to buy the book, or maybe you just want the audiobook version, I'll put a link to that in the description below. So like always, I'll be walking you through my thoughts about this book and we'll discuss the good, the bad, and the blessing. So first, the good. Obviously, books like this are super motivational and very inspiring. You read these books and you walk away with your faith strengthened, and they can do things that other type of Christian writing can't, because there are stories of truth, of faith being tested and proven and coming out on the other side victorious. But one thing that I think is important when you're reading this genre of literature is that you don't just sit back and feel horror for the things that the people are facing. Yes, they are horrible things. Yes, their suffering is real. No one should ever have to go through any type of persecution because of their faith. However, the stories aren't there so that you feel pity for these people. The stories are there to encourage you, to strengthen your faith, to make you feel more resolved, more steadfast in your following of Christ, and support those people who are doing this work. Not everybody's going to be a missionary that has to go out into the field and preach to people, while facing persecution. However, we all have been called to spread the gospel throughout the world. And so if we're not out there, then at least we should be supporting in ways that are important. And again, these stories aren't here for us to feel pity and say, oh my God, it's so terrible. Yes, that's true. Yes, that's a natural human reaction. But at the end of the day, we should also feel encouraged that if our brothers and sisters could face persecution and stand steadfast in their faith to Christ, then so could we. It's hard to read a book like this and not walk away with a profound sense of scale of our own trials and tribulations. How is it possible that our brothers and sisters are facing real life persecution with their lives on the line, and we allow the trivialities of life, the very simple things, to rob us of the peace that's supposed to surpass every understanding? And as believers, I think it's important to read books like this because it helps keep us encouraged and strengthened and focused that if they could do it, we can also do it. And then find ways that maybe we could be of benefit, that we could be a channel of blessing for those people who are suffering in those situations. And now the bad. Now, don't get me wrong, this is a great book. I profoundly enjoyed it and thought that every story had an impact on my life in one way or another, but there are some things about it that are more drawbacks than they are just bad. For example, this is not a book that you could binge read. And the chapters themselves aren't even that long. They're roughly 40 pages. The problem is that you can't sit there and read one chapter after the other. I mean, you can, but you can't. And the reason is not because of the length, it's because of the weight. I got to the end of every chapter and kind of felt like I had to stop and sit back and reflect and ponder. So if you're looking for a quick read, this is not it. Also, in the introduction, it did say that it tried to gather modern stories of persecution. However, although this book was published in 2003, some of the stories go back to like 1945. So, I kind of had this expectation that I would be hearing about modern stories nowadays, and I was reading some stories that were like right after World War II. And although that doesn't diminish the impact of the stories, I kind of felt like I was not expecting that. And now for the blessings. And there were so many that I came across while reading this. So rather than pull out quotes like I did the first time, I thought that I might summarize each story and kind of tell you a little bit of what I pulled out from each one. So first there was Adele, the young woman from Indonesia whose village was attacked by Muslim jihadist extremists. They came and completely destroyed her village one night simply because they were Christians. They chased her into the jungle, murdered her son right in front of her, separated her from her husband and daughter, imprisoned her for years, imprisoned her daughter as well, forced her into a marriage. But her story taught me one thing, and that is to never give up on hope because God is faithful. Then there's the story of Purnima, the woman from Bhutan who at the young age of 12 accepted Jesus after seeing him perform a miracle and heal her sister. Her family, on the other hand, were hardcore Buddhists and kicked her out of their house at 12 years old. She ran away, lived in refugee camps, eventually was imprisoned for preaching about her faith. And even in that prison, after all that suffering, years upon years, she took all the money that she had after being beaten and robbed that she was able to save, and she spent it not on herself in that prison, but on the other prisoners. She threw them a feast, right? Because she gave from grace what from grace she had received. Then there was Ada, the young woman who stood up in a Russian court and stood for the truth in the face of persecution. At a young age, her family faced a devastating loss when her mother died, and yet in her pain, God found her and he healed her heart and used her as a strong voice in the underground church in Russia. And even though she faced years and years of being hunted by the police, being thrown into prison, being tortured, being beaten, and even sent to re-education camps, she still stood up for the truth and let the world know the atrocities that she was facing in Russia during that time. Sabina, the woman from Romania whose husband was a pastor and refused to bow down before the new communist government. He refused to accept bribes to be in their pocket and preach what they wanted him to preach. He stood up for the truth of the gospel, and because of that, they were persecuted. Her family was torn apart. Her husband was taken from her for decades, and she finally got him back after she herself had been sent to prisons, work camps, brutally beaten, tortured in ways that are so difficult to kind of describe. And years after that, her and her husband were reunited, only to be separated again. But still, she held fast, because even though she had been separated from her husband, she had still remained faithful to her God. Tara, the girl from Pakistan, who at a very young age, her curiosity led her to study the Bible behind her parents' back. When they found out, they beat her so bad that she laid on the floor for 3 days unconscious. Then when she got up, she ran out of the house, and they hunted her for years and years, her own family looking to kill her. But it was God's grace that sustained her in those moments, and it was God's love that continues to sustain her as she preaches in the underground church in Pakistan. Then there's Ling, the woman from China who grew up in extreme poverty, never believing in God, never believing in his love, only to be turned around and caught up in his grace to become a witness of those things that she never even believed in the first place. She traveled the countryside in China, preaching the gospel, finding the Bible wherever she could, even if it was handwritten, and taking it to people who had never had a Bible in their lives, all at her own risk, because she believed in God's word. Gladys, the missionary from Australia who went to India to satisfy a need, to help to bring medical services to people who needed them. She lived there, she served among the people, only to have an extremist cult from that same place take her husband and her children and murder them. And then she was able to look at them in their face and forgive them. Gladys is a profound reflection of God's love for us, who when he was nailed to that cross, he said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Gladys was able to stand in that courtroom, face her family's murderers, and also forgive them. And finally, Mai, the girl who escaped from Vietnam, trying to escape poverty, only to run into the arms of God in a refugee camp. Rather than staying there and waiting for her visa so that she can come to the United States or to Australia, she decided to go back to Vietnam, go back to the place that she escaped from narrowly, go back to the place where they were persecuting Christians, to speak about the God that had found her. All of these women displayed a profound faith grounded in the person of God, grounded in the truth of who he is. If you read this book, I promise that you will walk away encouraged, strengthened, and convicted to follow in their footsteps. As believers, when we surrender our lives to Christ, we surrender it all, mind, body, and soul. And yet I feel like we constantly live like that's not the case. We put our desires before his, our dreams, our goals, our ambitions before his. And yet the Lord's Prayer says, "Your kingdom come, your will be done." If we adopt that attitude, there is no promise of comfort or luxury. There never was. But there is a promise that we will bear witness to God's will move in us and through us. This story has at its heart the story of women who believed God, whose faith was tested, and who stood firm. Let us follow in their examples. I give this book 4 out of 5 bookmarks. I'd love to hear from you guys in the comments. Which one of the stories sounded the most interesting or the most impactful for you? Let me know down below in the comment section. Also, let me know if you ever heard of this book or ever read this book. I'm really interested to have a conversation with you guys. I promise I'll respond to your comments. And once again, if you're interested in either signing up for a free copy of this book, or you just want to purchase either the physical paperback or the audiobook, I'll leave links to that in the description below. Thank you guys so much for spending some time with me, for taking your time out to watch this video. Don't forget to leave a like, to comment, to subscribe, turn on that notification bell, and I'll see you guys next time. Take care.